Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is Pro Revenge Story. This happened just last week, and I'm finally ready to share what went down. I'm not quite sure if it qualifies as pro, but it definitely isn't petty. I work as a professional truck driver. Throughout the U.S. highways, there are truck stops that operate a pay-to-park system with about 10 to 20% of their lots designated as reserved. Each space costs between $15 to $25. At this particular truck stop in Pennsylvania, parking was $17, which is a decent deal for a guaranteed spot. The reservations run for 24 hours, starting at 4 p.m. local time until 3 p.m. the following day. Knowing I had a late-night delivery, I arrived around 3:30 p.m. and paid for a reserved spot. I approached the front desk and spoke to the manager. "I've got a delivery up the road tonight. I'll be back once it's done, but I'll definitely clear out before tomorrow afternoon," I explained. "No problem at all," she replied, typing into her computer. "I'll mark the spot as sold when you leave. That way, if anyone tries to reserve it later, I'll know it's already taken." Around 11:15 p.m., I headed out for my delivery. The facility was running behind schedule, and I didn't get out until 2:30 a.m. Exhausted, I drove back to the truck stop to reclaim my paid spot, only to discover all the reserved parking spaces were occupied. I called the manager on duty. "Hey, I paid for spot R7 earlier. All the reserved spots are full. Someone's definitely parked without paying." "Let me send someone to check," she responded. "Stay in the fuel island for now." From my vantage point, I watched as an employee walked through the lot, checking trucks. He stopped at a truck pulling a distinctive bright orange trailer, a company rig I recognized well. The employee started knocking firmly on the cab door. "Hey, you're parked illegally! You need to move this truck now!" I heard him shout. The driver yanked open his door, and I could clearly see a Heineken bottle in one hand and what looked suspiciously like drug paraphernalia in the other. "Who the hell are you to tell me where I can park?" the driver slurred angrily. "Sir, this is a reserved spot. Move your truck or we'll have to call the police and a tow company," the employee warned. "Go ahead and try it," the driver shouted before slamming his door shut. The employee immediately called the police, who arrived within minutes. Having previously worked for that trucking company, I knew their strict policies. No alcohol in the cab, no drugs, and absolutely no weapons, especially loaded ones. This driver had violated all three policies, plus some additional illegal substances the police discovered during their search. As they led him away in handcuffs, I called the company's safety director. "Just wanted to let you know your truck's heading to impound and your driver's heading to jail," I explained. He had quite a collection of prohibited items in the cab. "Thank you for letting us know," she replied wearily. "He's definitely terminated. We have zero tolerance for this kind of behavior." I finally parked in my rightful spot, thinking about how one driver's poor choices had just cost him his career. Sometimes life's lessons come at a steep price. The next one is an entitled people story. I never thought I'd find myself in a standoff with a freaking bounty hunter on my own front lawn, but that's exactly what happened last summer. And all because some power-hungry HOA president decided my garden gnomes were offensive. Let me back up a bit. I bought my house about 5 years ago in what I thought was a quiet, normal neighborhood. The previous owners mentioned there was an HOA, but assured me it was pretty hands-off. Just basic stuff like keeping your lawn mowed and not painting your house neon green. Fine by me. For the first 3 years, everything was great. I paid my annual dues, kept my property neat, and nobody bothered me. Then came the regime change. The old HOA president, a reasonable guy named Bill, moved away when his company transferred him. That's when Diane took over. From day one, it was like she'd been waiting her whole life to wield this tiny bit of power over other people. Within a month of taking over, every homeowner received a new 47-page updated community guidelines packet. 47 pages. The old rules were maybe 4 pages tops. Suddenly, there were regulations about everything. What flowers you could plant, what time you could put your trash cans out and in, what color your mailbox flag could be. It was insane. I mostly ignored it. My house was set back a bit from the main road, with a good-sized yard and some trees providing privacy. I figured if I kept things looking nice, they'd leave me alone. Boy, was I wrong. It started with a letter about my garden gnomes. I collect them, not in a weird way, just a fun hobby. I had maybe a dozen scattered through my garden beds. The letter claimed they were lawn ornaments of a whimsical nature, which apparently violated Section 12, Paragraph 3 of the new guidelines. I tossed the letter in the trash. 2 weeks later, I got another one, this time with a $50 fine. I wrote back explaining that I wasn't part of this new HOA madness and had never agreed to the updated guidelines. That's when Diane started showing up at my door, always with her clipboard, always with that tight smile that never reached her eyes. "You need to remove those gnomes and pay your fine, which is now $100 due to late fees," she'd say. "The gnomes stay, and I'm not paying anything," I'd reply before closing the door. This back and forth went on for months. The fines kept increasing, and soon they were sending me notices about other supposed violations. My grass being half an inch too tall, my mailbox being the wrong shade of black, my wind chimes being audibly disruptive. I kept documenting everything, taking pictures, saving their ridiculous letters, and recording our interactions when she'd show up at my door. I was building my case, but I honestly thought it would just fizzle out eventually. They couldn't actually do anything to me, right? Then came the final notice letter, stating that if I didn't comply with all regulations and pay my accumulated fines, now over $3,000, they would take further action to enforce compliance. I laughed it off. What were they going to do? Arrest me? Well, not exactly, but close. I was working from home on a Tuesday when I heard engines roaring up my driveway. Looking out, I saw 3 pickup trucks and a Jeep parking in front of my house. 6 men in tactical-looking gear jumped out and started fanning out across my property. I ran outside. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The biggest guy, who clearly thought he was some kind of commando, flashed a badge at me. "Frank Cooper, licensed recovery agent. We have authorization from the Sunny Pines Homeowners Association to remove prohibited items and assess property violations." "You mean you're a bounty hunter?" I asked incredulously. "For garden gnomes?" He didn't appreciate my tone. "Sir, we have legal authority to be here. Please step aside." "Like hell you do," I said, pulling out my phone and starting to record. "This is private property and you're trespassing. Leave now or I'm calling the police." Frank pulled out some official-looking papers. "This is our authorization, signed by the HOA president and notarized." I glanced at it but stood my ground. "I don't care if it's signed by the president of the United States. You're not authorized to be on my property." Meanwhile, his crew was already removing my gnomes and taking pictures of my house and yard. One guy was actually measuring the height of my grass with a ruler. I dialed 911 and reported armed trespassers on my property. While waiting for the police, I continued recording everything and repeatedly told them they were trespassing. Frank kept insisting they had the right to be there, saying things like HOA have enforcement authority, and this is all perfectly legal, sir. When the police finally arrived, Frank showed them his bounty hunter credentials and the HOA paperwork. To my horror, the officers seemed unsure about the situation. "This is a civil matter," one cop told me with a shrug. "If the HOA has enforcement provisions in their covenants—" "I never agreed to these new covenants," I cut in. "And even if I had, since when can an HOA hire mercenaries to raid private property?" Thankfully, the senior officer was more reasonable. After examining the paperwork more closely, he told Frank and his crew they needed to leave my property immediately. "But we have authorization," Frank protested. "What you have is a piece of paper signed by an HOA president, not a court order," the officer explained. "That doesn't give you the right to enter private property against the owner's wishes. If the HOA has issues with compliance, they need to pursue it through proper legal channels." Frank and his crew reluctantly packed up and left, but not before he warned me, "This isn't over. The HOA will take further action." I was shaking with anger by the time they left. Not only had these thugs invaded my property and handled my belongings, but they'd taken all my gnomes and loaded them into their trucks. "They stole my property," I told the officer. "I want to press charges." The officer sighed. "Look, this is messy. They claim they have authorization. You say they don't. Your best bet is to contact a lawyer who specializes in HOA disputes." And that's exactly what I did. The very next morning, I was sitting in the office of Marion Jeffries, an attorney who, as luck would have it, absolutely despised overreaching HOA. "They did what?" she exclaimed when I showed her the video. I explained the whole situation, showed her all the documentation I'd been keeping, and played the videos of the raid. "This is outrageous," she said, shaking her head. "Hiring bounty hunters to enforce HOA regulations? I've been practicing for 20 years and I've never seen anything this brazen." She explained that while HOA do have certain enforcement powers, they are extremely limited in what they can actually do. They can issue fines, place liens in some cases, and eventually pursue foreclosure for unpaid dues, but only through proper legal channels with court oversight. What they can't do, she emphasized, is send armed men onto your property to confiscate your belongings. That's theft, trespassing, and possibly intimidation. We decided to fight back hard. We filed a lawsuit against the HOA Diane personally and Frank's recovery company. The charges included trespassing, theft, harassment, and violation of my property rights. We also filed for an emergency injunction to prevent them from entering my property again. When Diane was served with the lawsuit, she apparently went ballistic. She sent a community-wide email claiming I was a troublemaker who was threatening the property values of everyone with my tacky lawn ornaments and rebellious attitude. Several neighbors forwarded me the email with messages of support. Turns out I wasn't the only one fed up with Diane's reign of terror. My lawsuit became a rallying point for others who had been bullied by her ridiculous rules. The day of our preliminary hearing, I was nervous but prepared. Marion had coached me well on what to expect. What I didn't expect was to see half the neighborhood show up in support. When the judge asked me to explain the situation, I calmly laid out what had happened, showing the video of the raid and presenting the documentation of the escalating harassment. The HOA lawyer tried to argue that the covenants gave them the right to inspect and enforce regulations, but the judge wasn't having it. Counsel, are you seriously arguing that an HOA can hire armed bounty hunters to enter private property without a court order? The judge asked incredulously. They're licensed recovery agents, Your Honor, the lawyer responded weakly. Licensed to pursue bail jumpers and fugitives, not to confiscate garden gnomes, the judge shot back. This is one of the most egregious overreaches I've seen from an HOA, and I've seen plenty. The judge granted our emergency injunction and strongly advised the HOA to return my property immediately and settle the case. But Diane wasn't going down without a fight. She refused to settle, claiming the HOA had done nothing wrong and that I was the one violating the rules. So we proceeded to a full trial. By this time, other homeowners had joined the lawsuit, turning it into a class action against the HOA. The testimonies from my neighbors about Diane's harassment were damning. One elderly couple described how she'd fined them for having a ramp installed for their disabled son. Another family had been threatened with liens because their Christmas lights stayed up 2 days past the January 2nd deadline. The final nail in the coffin was when Frank took the stand and admitted that Diane had told him to make an example of me so others would fall in line. The judge's ruling was comprehensive and satisfying. The HOA was ordered to return all confiscated property immediately, pay damages of $50,000 for harassment, trespassing, and theft, cover all my legal fees, which were substantial, revert to the original HOA covenants until new ones could be properly voted on by all homeowners, remove Diane from the board permanently. Additionally, Frank's company was fined and reported to the state licensing board for misuse of their authority. The aftermath was almost as satisfying as the court victory. Diane was forced to step down from the HOA board and an emergency election was held. The new president, a reasonable guy who lived 3 doors down from me and had also been targeted by Diane's rules. All my gnomes were returned, though a couple were damaged during the raid, for which I received additional compensation. I added a few more to my collection just because I could. Most importantly, the HOA went back to being what it should be, a minimal organization that maintains common areas and ensures no one turns their front yard into a junkyard. The new guidelines are 4 pages long. I still get letters from people in other neighborhoods dealing with HOA nightmares. I always tell them the same thing. Document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to fight back. HOA may have some power, but it's not unlimited, and it certainly doesn't include hiring bounty hunters to raid your property. And if you're ever in my neighborhood, stop by and say hello. You can't miss my house. It's the one with all the garden gnomes. The next one is a malicious compliance story. A year ago, I got fired from a job as efficiency lead. It happened a week after I noted that I was going to become a father, but that's another aspect. The reason I was hired was to dig deeper into company issues, finding the root cause. My manager was thrilled to have an actual FBA on board, cue her assistant manager. Since I needed to learn the ins and outs, she got me into spending 70% of my time into useless tracking that she needed for her glorious monthly pivot tables. The thing is that noting down of post-its, mails, and several other influx into a spreadsheet got me some very much needed insight. Either, for example, the printers were moved every month from one site to the other, or there was a huge flaw, some if those flaws would be considered huge flags for the equivalent of IRS. When I started tracking them, as my job was exactly that, the AM tried to block me from several internal data. Since the manager and her assistant were pretty close, I tried to get the actual department from said flaws in the loop. Less than a week later, the manager asked why I was snooping around other departments. Meanwhile, everyone I spoke to at other departments were more than helpful in gathering information, even speaking to counterparts at other sites. 2 days later, she notified me she asked IT for a full copy of my mailbox, against the law, and was not amused. Henceforth, I had to include her in every mail I send and had to write down by the minute on every case file I was working on. The last one was the easiest: malicious compliance. When I got a call, I noted it. When I went to get a coffee, I noted internal movements, even someone sticking his head inside the door to say hi. She got an Excel sheet with about 600 lines a day, including a line after each entry for filling out the sheet. After 3 days, she was furious and wasn't taking things serious. Of course I wasn't, but she didn't have to know. I asked her to email me on the specifics she wanted me to write down and asked for a route path on every project. With a, "You know what I want," she stormed off. I got an email from HR for a talk, told them everything, including my notes on every meeting. They asked me to just set up a spreadsheet with a total per day on every project and mailed it to the manager, including the note that I needed the information her assistant had blocked me from. The including in the email part was fairly simple. It was about 10% of my total conversations. When the manager went on vacation, she said she liked the new way of working and told me to push on 3 main issues I laid out. And of course, the assistant took her chance to get into the high chair. The mails were not adequate, so I had to send her a full report on any conversation. It started innocent, till I got to an old file with the signature of the assistant and several site managers. I started calling them and asked about the information listed. After about 5 phone calls and a small note mailed to the assistant, she stormed into the shared office calling me a no-good golden retriever trying to find truffles in muck water. She demanded a full report on any coming call. Cue malicious compliance number 2. I started using voice-to-text software to make full transcripts on any call. Even a question about something like, "How is the now cleaning lady doing?" was fully written down. Imagine receiving an average of 4 hours a day of transcription. Because of the flooding, she missed the pattern about the €1,000,000 issue I was gently going towards. When the manager came back, the assistant told her I was harassing her. Even without a chance to give a reply, I received an official letter at my house about an inquiry. The inquiry was the manager, someone from HR, and someone from the European chair. To top it all off, the assistant manager had given the manager a list of confidential documents that I have stolen from her private laptop, including that old file sitting somewhere on the server. When they asked why I needed that file, I started pointing out that the file was pointing to a huge flaw concerning legal documents and payments, the exact thing I was hired for. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that I was going out the door within a few days. So I started rattling up the cage. I read my initial job description and the internal guidelines to the role. The 2 guys I was working with went into a frenzy to find any consequent from that error. Site manager were alerted, accounting started making calculations. The last email that I received was probably sent too early. OP falsified several documents on the server to get manager and assistant manager into trouble. Any communication should be deleted by the end of the day. Needless to say, I had to pack my things. 3 months later, I met some guys from the company. Turned out the damage was done, but the cover-up was even better. The avalanche of people involved that quit was undeniable, and some departments involved had over 50% of workforce sitting at home due to mental issues. The duo still works there, sitting on a lie that can still cost the firm millions a year since they still haven't solved the issue. The next one is an entitled people story. This is a semi-update to a post I made in a different subreddit, but is worth a recap. So, I have, or had, but for the sake of the story, I'll use the present tense. This friend who was at least somewhat helpful in my coming out process when I was in my 20s and have been friends for 20 years. He was friends/co-workers with my first boyfriend, and even after me and the boyfriend broke up, we all kept in touch. Being friends, we hung out, and it was always us helping out one another in various ways. I was the designated driver a few times on gay bar outings since I never drink. He introduced me to a large gay metropolitan area. I helped him move. He gave me some furniture that I still have to this day. I gave him some technical equipment that was still in good shape when I was doing personal upgrades. And he let me hang for a few days with him and his husband when I came to visit for a pride festival nearby. All this predates the issues that have come up in the last year, and are rather notable important points for later on. While he has kept steady work, he never really stayed in one lane for long: retail, rental properties, and always having his eye on the next good opportunity. However, last year he lost his job, may have been layoffs. Around that time, he totally started texting me on the regular about various things that started delving into the realm of him demanding an answer on. While I won't go into specifics, he was asking questions about the field of work I'm in, and asking questions of companies I never worked for, and essentially demanding an answer on how they do their work and why they don't do it a different way. All this was mixed in with some vague conspiracy theories that were very fringe and personally somewhat insufferable. The messages were aplenty, and it got to a point where I had to type up a very, very concerted and long-winded text message stating why I could never answer those questions and that I preferred not to talk about work when I'm off the clock with anyone because simply it felt like work. He responded somewhat curtly but with a sense of understanding. Which brings us to earlier this year. My friend started an online fundraiser that was more of a crowdfunding effort for a startup. A startup for which he even told me himself, though he doesn't entirely remember it, is a bit of a racket. And if I went into the specifics of what he was wanting to do with that money, you'd find it highly ironic in the grand scheme of this story. And then he started messaging me about it, once, sometimes twice a day. Text and social media messages, and these were direct messages that weren't some form or template. Now, I've had a long-standing policy of limiting my contributions, charitable or otherwise, for various professional or personal reasons. The professional reasons are valid and will remain vague, but the personal runs the gamut, me not being in a grounded spot financially, me not wanting someone to feel like they're beholden to me, them thinking whatever contribution I make is not enough, not wanting to be blamed if something I gave money to fails, if I don't entirely trust the idea, or just plain me not wanting to. It's not an a-hole thing to say that I can do with my money what I wish and I shouldn't have to explain anything to anyone about it. Additionally, one can say any bit counts, but for me, it's the principle of me being able to make my decisions with my money without being forced. The messages continue for days. I don't message back because I feel that no matter what answer I give, it's not going to be good enough. Frankly, too, it put me in a weird spot, because I'm not sure if he viewed this friendship the same way I did. I'm friends with someone because we mesh well. Transactional relationships are never healthy, but it culminated one night. He sent me a message about a celebrity death. I responded back and was all, "OMG, you're alive." Proceeded to try to give me a talking to for ignoring him and essentially said that I owed him because I've given a lot to you in the past. Direct quote. That set me off, but I very directly told him that while I could offer my own personal support, time, and services, I could not and would not be financially contributing, saying, hey, I got stuff going on in my life. That I understood if he considered me an a-hole for it, that my decision to not contribute isn't in any way personal, and that I wouldn't be discussing this further. He told me that I had changed, that I was an a-hole, and he unfriended me on social media. Apparently, I'm not the only one he's done this to, with similar results. His Facebook page, which is still viewable to me, had a status update about the quickest way to get rid of someone you don't want to talk to is to ask them to donate to your cause. It wasn't a cause, it was a startup. I don't think he was asking me, and I'm pretty sure that status wasn't directed me. He was expecting me to donate. He was practically demanding it. I lost a friend that night, but the conscience remains clear on why. Anyway, thank you for watching.